My mother-in-law tried to take my daughter without telling me. Then she told the court what really happened. The day my daughter vanished began like any other Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always chaotic. My busiest day at the law firm, Emily's ballet class, and Mark's late meeting. I'd rushed out that morning, kissing Emily's forehead as she sat at the kitchen table, her dark curls falling over her frozen cereal bowl. She'd looked up at me with those big brown eyes so much like her father's, and asked if we could have spaghetti for dinner. I promised we would. Diane's coming over after school, Mark reminded me as I grabbed my coffee. She said something about wanting to take Emily shopping for new shoes. I nodded, distracted by the case files spilling from my bag. My mother-in-law's weekly visits had become routine over the past year. Since her husband died, Diane had inserted herself more firmly into our lives, showing up unannounced, offering unsolicited parenting advice, and making subtle comments about my working hours. But she was Emily's grandmother, and despite our differences, I tried to maintain a civil relationship for my daughter's sake. "Tell her not to spoil Emily too much," I said, kissing Mark goodbye. "And remind her Emily needs to be back by 6 for dinner." I promised spaghetti. That was the last normal moment before everything unraveled. My days spiraled into a nightmare of back-to-back client meetings and a surprise courthouse appearance. By the time I checked my phone at 4:30, I had 3 missed calls from Emily's school. My stomach dropped as I stepped into the hallway to return the call. "Mrs. Carter? This is Miss Jenkins from Oak Ridge Elementary." The school secretary's voice was dight with concern. "I'm calling because Emily wasn't picked up after school today. We've been trying to reach you for almost an hour." "What? That's impossible. My mother-in-law was supposed to pick her up." "No one came for Emily. The after-school program supervisor brought her to the office, but when we called the emergency contact, your mother-in-law, Diane Carter, there was no answer." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I tried calling Diane while racing to my car, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Then I called Mark, who sounded equally confused. Diane confirmed she was picking Emily up. Let me try calling her again. The drive to Emily's school was a blur of red lights and honking horns as I weaved through traffic scenarios, playing through my mind like a horror film. Had there been an accident? Was Diane ill? Had she simply forgotten? When I arrived at the school, the building stood quiet and nearly empty. Miss Jenkins met me at the front office, her expression grave. "Mrs. Carter, Emily isn't here." The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. "What do you mean? You said she wasn't picked up." "That's what we thought, but after I spoke with you, Mrs. Jenkins checked the sign out. Your mother-in-law did pick Emily up, about 15 minutes late. She signed her out at 3. I stared at the sign-out sheet, at Diane's familiar looping signature. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by confusion and anger. I called Diane again, voicemail. I called Mark. "She picked her up," I said, when he answered. "She signed her out, but she's not natting her phone." "I'm leaving work now," Mark said. "Maybe her phone died, and she took Emily to rehearse. I'll meet you at home, and if they're not there, we'll drive to Mom's." But when I pulled into our driveway 30 minutes later, Mark was standing on the porch, arms crossed, face ashen. No sign of his mother's silver Lexus. "They're not here," he said, following me inside. "And I called her neighbors. Her car isn't at our house either." We stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the morning's breakfast dishes and Emily's abandoned backpack, the one she'd left behind because Diane had promised to buy her a new one with princesses on it. I noticed the light blinking on our answering machine and pressed play, hoping for answers. "Mark? It's Mom." Diane's voice filled the room, recorded at 10:17 that morning. "I've been thinking about our conversation. You're right, and I'm going to take care of it today. Don't worry about anything. I'll call you later." Mark's face contorted in confusion. "What conversation? I haven't talked to her about anything important in days." Cold dread crept up my spine as I opened the refrigerator, a habit born of anxiety. That's when I noticed the pink paper stuck to the door with our butterfly magnet. Emily's butterfly, the one she'd made in art class just last week. The note was in Diane's handwriting. "Taking Emily for a few days. She needs time with her grandmother." Don't worry. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, the paper trembling in my hand. She took her? Without asking? Without telling us where? Mark took the note, reading it twice before crumpling it in his fist. This is insane. She can't just take our daughter. We spent the next 4 hours calling everyone. Diane's friends, her sister in Columbus, the local hotels, hospitals, even the police, who informed us that since Emily was with her grandmother and there was a note, it didn't qualify as a kidnapping. They classified it as a family situation, but promised to keep an eye out for Diane's car. By 10 p.m., with still no word, I was pacing our living room, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if they'd been in an accident somewhere remote? What if Diane had had some sort of breakdown? She'd been different since her husband died. More controlling, more critical, especially of me. She's been saying strange things lately, Mark admitted, his voice hollow. About how Emily needs more stability, more traditional parenting. I thought she was just being her usual judgmental self. At 11:43 p.m., my phone chimed with a text message. From Diane. Emily is safe with me. I called immediately. No answer. I texted back, where are you? We're worried sick. Please bring Emily home. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, Emily needs time away from your influence. We'll be in touch. Mark took the phone from my shaking hands and called his mother. This time, she answered, but he had the call on speaker. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Bring Emily home right now. Mark, darling, I know you're upset, but this is for the best. You and I both know it. Know what? Mom, you've kidnapped our daughter. Don't be so dramatic. I'm her grandmother, and you told me how worried you were about Jennifer's parenting. Mark's eyes met mine, wide with shock. I never said that, not once. You didn't have to, sweetie. I can read between the lines. All those times you've complained about Jennifer working late, about how Emily was spending too much time in after-school care, those were normal venting sessions. Everyone complains about their spouse sometimes. It doesn't mean I want you to take my daughter. There was a long pause. Emily's sleeping now. She's fine. We're staying with a friend, and tomorrow we're going to get this sorted out properly. I've spoken to a lawyer. The line went dead. Mark tried calling back immediately, but she'd turned off her phone. We sat in stunned silence, the implication of her words sinking in. A lawyer. What did that mean? Mark held his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I never said anything to make her think I wanted this, he whispered. You have to believe me, Jen. I did believe him. In 7 years of marriage, Mark had always been my partner, my rock. We'd had our struggles, what couple didn't, but we'd faced them together. And now his mother had taken our child and implied he'd wanted it. I grabbed my laptop and began searching for lawyers specializing in emergency custody situations. If Diane wanted a legal battle, she would get one. But as the night stretched into early morning, with still no word on where they were, a terrible thought kept circling. What if we couldn't find them? What if Diane had taken Emily across state lines? What if she'd been planning this for months? At 6:17 a.m., my phone rang. A local number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Carter, this is Officer Daniels, with the Sheriff's Department. We've located your mother-in-law and daughter. They're at the Hampton Inn off Highway. Relief crashed over me like a wave. Are they okay? Is Emily all right? Yes, ma'am. Your daughter is fine. They were spotted by a patrol officer who recognized the variable from the alert we put out. We've confirmed their identities, but legally, we can't remove the child from her grandmother without a court order. Your mother-in-law showed us a text conversation that indicated she had permission to take the child. That's impossible. We never— Ma'am, I understand you're upset. This is why I'm calling. Your mother-in-law has informed us that her lawyer will be filing for emergency temporary guardianship this morning. I wanted to give you a heads up. The room seemed to tilt. I steadied myself against the kitchen counter, looking at Mark's exhausted face. Thank you, officer, I managed to say. Can we at least see our daughter? You can try, ma'am, but without a court order, we can't force your mother-in-law to allow it. This is a civil matter now. As I hung up, the full weight of what was happening crashed down on me. My mother-in-law hadn't just taken my daughter for an impromptu vacation. She was trying to take her permanently, and somehow, she'd convinced herself that Mark supported this insanity. Mark stood beside me, his face a mask of betrayal and fear. She's gone too far this time, he said, his voice breaking. Way too far. Neither of us could have imagined what awaited us when the sun rose, or how Diane's obsession would nearly tear our family apart before the truth finally came to light. Sleep never came that night. Mark and I sat at the kitchen table, empty coffee mugs scattered around us, frantically researching custody laws on our laptops. Every few minutes, I'd send another text to Diane, begging for a photo, a call, anything to prove Emily was okay. Only once did she respond, a single picture of Emily sleeping in a hotel bed, her stuffed giraffe clutched to her chest. "I've called work, told them I need emergency leave," Mark said, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "My boss has a cousin who's a family attorney. He's meeting us at 8. I nodded, too numb to speak. The first rays of morning sunlight crept through our kitchen window when the doorbell rang. Mark opened it to find a stone-faced man in a suit, holding an envelope. "Mark and Jennifer Carter?" the man asked, consulting his clipboard. "You've been served." The moment felt surreal, as Mark signed for the envelope with trembling hands. He closed the door and joined me at the table, slowly opening the thick packet of legal papers. "Petition for emergency temporary guardianship," he read aloud, his voice breaking. "Filed by Diane Elizabeth Carter, maternal grandmother, on behalf of Emily Rose Carter, aged 5 years. I snatched the papers from him, scanning the allegations with growing horror. According to the filing, Mark had confided in his mother about my negligent parenting and emotional instability. It claimed I regularly left Emily alone while working late, that I'd been verbally abusive toward both Emily and Mark, and that I'd threatened to flee with Emily if Mark ever sought divorce. Every word was a knife to my heart. "This is insane," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. How could she make up these lies? But the most devastating blow came on page 3. The petition claimed Mark had privately expressed to his mother his desire for full custody, but felt intimidated and controlled by me. It portrayed Mark as a victim, manipulated by his domineering wife, unable to protect his daughter without his mother's intervention. I looked up at my husband, a question in my eyes I never thought I'd have to ask. "No," he said firmly, taking my hands. "Never. Not once. I swear to you, Jen, I never said any of this. She's fabricated everything." Relief washed over me, but was quickly followed by a wave of betrayal so intense I could barely breathe. For 5 years, I'd tolerated Diane's backhanded compliments, her judgmental glances, her constant undermining. I'd invited her to every birthday, every holiday, every school event. I'd sent her photos and updates, arranged weekly visits, all because I believed family was important to Emily. And this was how she repaid us. "The hearing's tomorrow morning," Mark said, checking the paperwork. "Judge Patricia Winters, Family Court, 9 a.m. I'd appeared before Judge Winters before, representing clients in my early days as a family law attorney. She was fair but strict, with little patience for family drama. This could work in our favor if we could prove Diane was lying. "We need evidence," I said, lawyer mode kicking in through my exhaustion. "Text messages, emails, witnesses who can testify to our parenting, and we need to find out what evidence Diane plans to present." The hours that followed became a blur of phone calls. We met with Richard Gonzalez, the attorney Mark's boss had recommended, in his downtown office. A heavyset man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, he reviewed the petition with growing concern. "These are serious allegations," he said, setting down the papers. "But they're also vague. Notice how there are no specific incidents cited, no dates, no witnesses beyond Diane herself? That works in our favor." "She's lying about everything," Mark insisted, his hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "I believe you," Richard said. "But family court isn't about belief, it's about evidence. We need to prove these claims are false, and we need to understand why your mother is doing this." The question hung heavy in the air. Why would Diane fabricate such horrible lies? What could she possibly hope gain? "She's always been controlling," Mark admitted. "After Dad died 2 years ago, it got worse. She calls me daily, shows up unannounced. She's been fighting with her sister over their mother's estate. Maybe she's having some kind of breakdown." Richard made notes, his pen scratching across his legal pad. "Has she ever expressed concerns about your parenting before?" I thought back to all the little comments. "You're letting Emily watch too much TV. You should be making her lunches from scratch." When I raised Mark, I never used daycare. "She's critical," I said slowly, but nothing that suggested she thought Emily was in danger. And the claims about your marriage? Richard asked. Any witnesses who can testify to your relationship? Mark's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced down, his face darkening. It's my cousin Tyler. Mom's called the entire family, telling them I'm finally standing up to Jennifer. They think I'm part of this. As Mark stepped out to call his cousin, Richard leaned forward. Jennifer, as your attorney, I need to ask, is there any truth to any of these allegations? Anything Diane could twist or take out of context? I met his gaze steadily. I work long hours sometimes. I've raised my voice when tired. But abuse? Neglect? Threatening to kidnap my own child? Absolutely not. Richard nodded, satisfied. Then we fight this with everything we've got. Tomorrow, we convince Judge Winters that this is nothing more than a vindictive grandmother's attempt to steal your child. As we left his office, I felt a strange calm settling over me, the calm of absolute clarity. Whatever twisted fantasy had taken root in Diane's mind, whatever lies she'd convinced herself were true, I would not let her take my daughter. Not tomorrow, not ever. With less than 24 hours until the hearing, Mark and I divided our tasks. He contacted friends, family members, and Emily's teachers, gathering statements about our parenting and marriage. I pored over the court filing, looking for inconsistencies in Diane's story. Richard called, Mark said, setting a cup of coffee beside my laptop. Diane's attorney submitted their evidence list, mostly photos and some letters. When the evidence packet arrived by courier an hour later, I spread the contents across our dining table. There were dozens of family photos spanning the last 6 years, holidays, birthdays, family gatherings, in the earliest ones taken before we had Emily. Mark was always smiling, his arm around his mother. In later photos, particularly ones including me, his body language changed, slightly turned away from Diane, standing closer to me. She's created a timeline, I murmured, arranging the photos in chronological order, showing how you've grown distant from her since we got married. Among the photos were printouts of text messages between Mark and his mother, selectively chosen to paint a troubling picture. A message from Mark complaining about a tough day when Emily was sick and I was stuck in court became evidence that I prioritized work over family. His text asking if Diane could watch Emily during our anniversary weekend was presented as proof that I didn't want to spend time with my daughter. But the most disturbing evidence was a handwritten letter from Diane to the judge, detailing her concerns about my influence on the family. She claimed Mark had become withdrawn and secretive after marrying me, that I'd systematically isolated him from his family, and that Emily was showing signs of emotional distress during visits with her. This is gaslighting on an epic scale, Mark said, his voice shaking with anger. She's rewriting our entire family history. As I studied the evidence more carefully, a troubling pattern emerged. In many of the photos, Emily was dressed in outfits I'd never seen, playing with toys we didn't own. There were images of her bedroom at Diane's house, a fully decorated space with a canopy bed and custom shelving. She's been planning this, I whispered, feeling sick. Look at Emily's room at her house. That's not a grandma's guest room. That's a permanent bedroom. Mark picked up a photo of Emily's bedroom and stared at it. This was taken months ago. The Christmas photo on her desk, that's from last December. We locked eyes, the realization hitting us simultaneously. This wasn't a sudden decision triggered by some imagined parenting failure. This was a calculated campaign that had been building for years. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old texts with Diane. There it was, subtle questions about our reigning choices, comments about Emily's behavior, offers to take her for longer periods. She'd been gathering ammunition, looking for weaknesses, creating a paper trail. Check your email, I told Mark. See if there's anything from your mom about her concerns. Mark searched his inbox, finding only mundane exchanges about visit schedules and holiday plans. Nothing, he said. If she was genuinely worried about Emily, wouldn't she have said something directly? That's when it clicked. This wasn't about Emily at all. I pulled up Diane's social media profiles, scrolling back through years of posts. The narrative became painfully clear. After her husband died, her posts focused almost exclusively on her role as a grandmother. Photos of Emily, stories about their time together, comments about being Emily's second mother. Her identity had become wrapped up in her relationship with our daughter. Simultaneously, her comments about me grew increasingly critical, though always veiled in fake concern. praying for Jennifer to find balance in her busy life. So blessed to give Emily stability when her parents are overwhelmed. Look at these, I said, showing Mark. She's been casting herself as Emily's savior and me as the villain for years now. Mark scrolled through the posts, his expression hardening. All these times she offered to take Emily for the weekend, saying she was giving us a break, she was actually building her case. I nodded, a heavy weight settling in my chest. It's not about protecting Emily from me, it's about taking Emily for herself. She's convinced herself that you secretly want this too, because she can't face the alternative that you chose me, our family, over her. As we dug deeper, examining years of interactions through this new lens, everything shifted into focus. The increasing frequency of her visits, the gifts that stayed at her house instead of coming home with Emily, the subtle questions about our finances, our work schedules, our marriage. She blames me for taking you away, I said softly. In her mind, I stole her son, and now she's trying to steal our daughter to even the score. Mark's phone rang, his Aunt Carol, Diane's sister. He put her on speaker. Mark, honey, I just heard what's happening, Carol said, her voice tight with concern. I want you to know I think Diane has lost her mind. She called me yesterday talking about how she was rescuing Emily from that woman's clutches. Carol, do you have any idea why she's doing this? I asked. There was a long pause. After Robert died, Diane became obsessed with being needed. She talked constantly about how Emily was her second chance, how she could do it right this time. I thought it was just grief talking. I never imagined she'd go this far. As we hung up, Mark and I looked at each other, understanding dawning. This wasn't just about a controlling mother-in-law. This was about a grieving woman who had lost her husband, and, in her mind, her son, and who now saw her granddaughter as her only chance for connection, for purpose. She's not well, Mark said quietly. But that doesn't excuse this. I gathered the evidence, sorting it into two piles, what we could use to counter her claims and what reveal her true motivations. When we face Diane in court tomorrow, we wouldn't just be defending our parenting, we'd be exposing the desperate loneliness that had driven a grieving woman to destroy her relationship with her son in a misguided attempt to fill the emptiness in her life. The family court building loomed before us, a sterile fortress of beige stone and tinted windows. Richard met us at the entrance, briefcase in hand, his face set with determination. I've reviewed all the evidence, he said as we walked through security. Judge Winters has a reputation for cutting through emotional arguments to find facts. That works in our favor. In the hallway outside courtroom C, we spotted them, Diane sitting primly on a bench, her gray hair perfectly styled, wearing a conservative blue dress that screamed responsible grandmother. Beside her sat a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit, who I assumed was her attorney. And beside them, clutching her stuffed giraffe, was Emily. Emily, I gasped, taking an instinctive step forward. My daughter looked up, her face brightening. Mommy, Daddy, she jumped off the bench and ran toward us before Diane could stop her. I dropped to my knees, engulfing her in a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. I missed you, sweetie, I whispered, fighting back tears. Are you okay? Emily nodded against my shoulder. Grandma said we're on a special trip, but I want to go home now. Can we go home? Before I could answer, Diane's attorney appeared at our side. Mrs. Carter, we agreed to let Emily see you before the hearing, but she needs to return to her grandmother now. Mark stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. That's our daughter you're talking about. Richard placed a restraining hand on Mark's arm. Not here, he murmured. Save it for inside. Reluctantly, I released Emily, watching as Diane's attorney led her back to where my mother-in-law sat, her face a mask of righteous indignation. Inside the courtroom, Judge Winters called the case promptly at 9 a.m. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed the petition. This is a hearing for temporary emergency guardianship, she announced. I'll hear from the petitioner first. Mrs. Lawson, proceed. Diane's attorney approached the bench, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Your Honor, my client is seeking temporary guardianship of her granddaughter, Emily Carter, due to concerns about the child's mother, Jennifer Carter. We have evidence that Miss Carter has created an unsafe environment for Emily through neglect and emotional abuse. My hands clenched into fists under the table. Richard shot me a warning glance. Furthermore, Mrs. Lawson continued, the child's father, Mark Herter, has privately expressed concerns about his wife's parenting, but feels unable to act due to the controlling nature of their relationship. Mark stiffened beside me. Judge Winters peered over her glasses at him. Mr. Carter, is this an accurate representation of your position? Mark stood, his voice steady. Absolutely not, Your Honor. My mother has fabricated these claims entirely. I fully support my wife and believe my daughter belongs at home with both of us. A flicker of surprise crossed Judge Winters' face. She turned to Diane's attorney. Counselor, your petition suggests Mr. Carter supports this action. Your Honor, our client believes Mr. Carter has been coerced into supporting his wife publicly while privately expressing different views. Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. That's a serious allegation. Do you have evidence beyond Mrs. Carter's belief? We do, Your Honor. We'd like to call Diane Carter to the stand. My stomach tightened as Diane took the oath, her hands steady on the Bible. She looked directly at Mark as she sat down, her eyes pleading for understanding. Mrs. Carter, please explain your concerns about your granddaughter's home environment, her attorney prompted. Diane straightened, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality. I've noticed troubling changes in Emily over the past year. She's become withdrawn during visits, sometimes crying when it's time to go home. She's mentioned staying alone while her mother works late. Objection, Richard called. Hearsay. Sustained, Judge Winters said. Please stick to what you've directly observed, Mrs. Carter. Diane nodded, barely missing a beat. Last Christmas, Emily had a bruise on her arm. When I asked about it, Jennifer became defensive. My mind raced back to Christmas. Emily had fallen off her new bike in the driveway. I'd explained this to Diane at the time, and she'd seemed to accept it. And your son, Mark? Has he expressed concerns to you? Diane's eyes flicked to Mark, then back to her attorney. Mark has always been protective of his family. After he married Jennifer, he changed. He calls less frequently, visits less often. But when we do speak privately, he confides in me. And what has he confided? That Jennifer works too much. That he worries about Emily being in after-school care so often. That Jennifer can be difficult when she's stressed. Mark's hand found mine under the table, squeezing it reassuringly. Has your son ever directly stated he wants custody of Emily? Mrs. Lawson asked, a hesitation almost imperceptible. Not in those exact words, but a mother knows her child. I can see his unhappiness. The questioning continued, with Diane painting a picture of a family in crisis, subtle tensions she'd observed, changes in Emily's behavior, moments of disagreement between Mark and me that she'd witnessed and apparently cataloged. With each statement, she twisted normal family dynamics into something sinister, reframing the narrative of our lives to suit her purpose. When it was Richard's turn for cross-examination, he approached Diane calmly. Mrs. Carter, you've described a pattern of concerning behavior, yet you never reported these concerns to Child Protective Services. Why not? Diane's composure slipped slightly. I hoped things would improve. I didn't want to cause trouble. Yet you didn't hesitate to take Emily without permission and file for guardianship. That seems like a significant segue from hoping things would improve. I reached my breaking point, Diane said, her voice hardening. When Mark told me about their fight last week. What fight would that be? Richard interrupted. Diane looked at Mark. About the summer camp. Mark didn't want Emily going to the overnight camp Jennifer had chosen. Richard walked to our table, picking up a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter this as Exhibit A. It's an email confirmation for Emily's summer day camp, not overnight camp, showing both parents as registered emergency contacts. Both Mr. and Mrs. Carter signed the permission form. A flush crept up Diane's neck. Well, perhaps I misunderstood. Mrs. Carter, have you ever been diagnosed with any mental health conditions? Richard asked. Objection. Mrs. Lawson stood, irrelevant and prejudicial. I'll allow it, Judge Winters said. The witness's state of mind is relevant to her perceptions. Diane's hands twisted in her lap. I saw a grief counselor after my husband died. She suggested I might have some situational depression. Did this counselor ever discuss with you the possibility that your grief might be affecting your perception of other relationships? No, Diane said firmly. My concerns about Emily are real. As Richard continued his methodical dismantling of Diane's testimony, I watched her face change, the confident righteousness giving way to defensive anger. She was losing control of the narrative she'd so carefully constructed, and with each question, the fantasy she'd built began to crumble. The weight of Diane's testimony hung in the courtroom like a storm cloud. Judge Winters called a brief recess, and Richard huddled with Mark and me in the hallway. "She's built an elaborate fantasy," Richard said, keeping his voice low. "But there are cracks in her story. When I question Mark, we'll widen those cracks." When court resumed, Mark took the stand, swearing to tell the truth with a steady hand on the Bible. He recounted our family life with calm precision, our shared parenting responsibilities, our communication about Emily's activities, the normal disagreements that any couple might have. "Mr. Carter," Richard asked, "has your mother ever expressed disapproval of your wife?" Mark hesitated, clearly trying to be fair. "My mother has always had high standards. She sometimes makes moms about Jennifer's work schedule or our parenting choices. But no more than most in-laws, I thought. And has she ever suggested you should have custody of Emily instead of sharing parenting with your wife?" "Never," Mark said firmly. "Not once." Diane's attorney approached for cross-examination, her smile thin and predatory. "Mr. Carter, isn't it true that after your father died, you expressed concern to your mother about Jennifer's long hours?" "I may have vented about being tired or stressed," Mark acknowledged. "As any parent might, but I never suggested Jennifer was neglectful or that I wanted any change in our family structure. Yet your mother seemed to believe you wanted her help in gaining custody of Emily. Why would she think that if you never indicated such a desire?" Mark looked directly at Diane for the first time. "I can't speak to what my mother believes, or why. I can only tell you what I actually said and wanted, which was never for her to take our daughter or seek guardianship." The questioning continued, with Diane's attorney trying to catch Mark in contradictions that didn't exist. When she finished, Judge Winters removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I'd like to hear from Mrs. Jennifer Carter now," she said. As I took the stand, I felt a strange calm. The truth was on our side. Plain and simple, I described finding Emily gone, the frantic search, the shocking court papers. I explained our family routines, Emily's development, the boundaries we'd tried to establish with Diane. "And had Mrs. Diane Carter ever expressed concerns about your parenting directly to you?" Richard asked. "She made suggestions," I said carefully, "about bedtimes, TV limits, what Emily should eat. But she never said she thought Emily was unsafe or unhappy." When Diane's attorney cross-examined me, she tried to portray me as a career-obsessed mother who resented her mother-in-law's involvement. But with each question, the narrative she was trying to construct became more obviously contrived. "I'd like to call Diane Carter back to the stand for redirect," Mrs. Lawson announced when finished with me. Diane returned, looking more confident than before. Her attorney led her through a series of questions about specific incidents, times she'd noticed Emily seemed tired or hungry, occasions when I'd been late picking her up from visits. "And these observations led you to believe Emily needed your protection?" Mrs. Lawson asked. "Yes," Diane said, "along with what Mark told me about their marriage problems." Richard was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Carter has already testified that no such conversations occurred." Sustained, Judge Winters said. "Mrs. Carter, please limit your testimony to direct observations, not hearsay." Diane's face flushed. "But he did tell me. Maybe not in those exact words, but I knew what he meant when he called after their fights. I knew he wanted my help." "Your Honor," Richard interjected. "The witness is again attributing statements to Mr. Carter that he has denied making." Judge Winters leaned forward, looking directly at Diane. "Mrs. Carter, did your son explicitly ask you to seek custody of his daughter?" Something shifted in Diane's expression. A hardening, a desperation. "He didn't have to say it outright. I'm his mother. I know what he needs, what Emily needs." "That's not what I asked." Judge Winters pressed. "Did your son, Mark Carter, ever tell you he wanted his wife out of the picture or that he wanted you to have guardianship of Emily?" The courtroom felt utterly silent. Even the court reporter paused, fingers hovering above her machine. Diane's eyes dart to Mark, then back to the judge. "He would have if he could," she finally said, her voice rising. He's afraid of her. She's turned him against me. Before he met her, we were so close. He told me everything. Now he barely calls, barely visits. She did that. She took my son, and now she's poisoning my granddaughter against me too. The outburst hung in the air. Diane's attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm, but it was too late. The mask had slipped. "Mrs. Carter," Judge Winters said quietly, "are you telling this court that your son never actually asked you to seek guardianship of his daughter?" Diane's shoulders sagged. "Not in those words, no." "And did he ever tell you he believed his wife was an unfit mother? He complained about her." "That's not what I asked." Diane's voice dropped to a whisper. "No." Judge Winters removed her glasses, setting them deliberately on the bench. "Mrs. Carter, did you take your granddaughter without her parents' knowledge or permission?" "I left a note," Diane said defensively. "After you had already removed the child from school," Judge Winters clarified. "Is that correct?" "Yes, but—" "And you then filed this petition claiming that the child's father supported your action when in fact he did not." Diane's composure cracked entirely. "He would have if she hadn't poisoned him against me. I was trying to protect both of them." Tears streamed down her face now. "You don't understand. After Robert died, Emily became everything to me. She's the only family I have left. Jennifer took Mark away, and now she's keeping Emily from me too. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't lose someone else." The raw grief in her voice silenced the courtroom. I felt a confusing mixture of anger and pity watching her fall apart on the stand. This woman had taken my child, had tried to destroy my family, and yet, in that moment, I could see the wounded, lonely person behind the terrible actions. Judge Winters let the moment settle before speaking. "I think we've heard enough. I'll make my ruling after a brief recess." As Diane was helped from the stand by her attorney, her eyes locked with mine. In that look was something I hadn't seen before, not hatred or righteousness, but a desperate, broken plea for understanding. And though I couldn't forgive her yet, for the first time I glimpsed the depth of pain that had driven her to such extremes. Judge Winters returned to the courtroom after 20 minutes, her face solemn as she took her seat. The courtroom had emptied except for our small group, Mark and me on one side, Diane and her attorney on the other. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented today, I'm ready to make my ruling," Judge Winters began, her voice echoing in the nearly empty room. "This court finds that the petition for emergency guardianship filed by Diane Carter is without merit and is hereby dismissed." I exhaled slowly, feeling Mark's hand tighten around mine. Furthermore, Judge Winters continued, "The court finds that Mrs. Diane Carter removed the minor child without parental consent and made false statements in her petition regarding the father's support of her actions." She looked directly at Diane. "Miss Carter, while I understand you're grieving the loss of your husband, your actions demonstrated a troubling disregard for parental rights and for the truth. Had the parents chosen to press charges for custodial interference, this could have resulted in criminal penalties." Diane sat rigid in her chair, staring straight ahead. "Emily Carter is to be immediately returned to the custody of her parents, Mark and Jennifer Carter. This court also recommends that any future visitation between the child and Mrs. Diane Carter be supervised until such time as the parents feel comfortable with unsupervised contact." This concludes today's hearing. The gavels struck with finality, and Emily was officially ours again. Richard shook our hands, promising to file the necessary paperwork to formalize the judge's decision. As we turned to leave, I caught sight of Diane still sitting alone, her attorney already gathering her papers. "Give me a minute," I told Mark, and approached my mother-in-law. Up close, she looked smaller somehow, the imperious grandmother replaced by a fragile, aging woman. She didn't look up as I stood before her. "We'll be taking Emily home now," I said quietly. Diane nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I never meant to hurt her." "But you did mean to hurt me," I replied, keeping my voice level. "You tried to kill our daughter, Diane. You lied to the court. You manipulated your family. Do you understand what you've done?" Her eyes finally met mine, red-rimmed and hollow. "I lost everything when Robert died. Then I watched Mark pull away, start his own family. Emily was my last connection. When you started talking about sending her to that summer camp, I felt like I was losing her too." "That was a day camp, Diane. 3 hours a day, 2 days a week. She shook her head. It wasn't just that. It was everything. The way you're raising her to be so independent. The way she talks about her friends at school more than she talks about me. I just wanted to matter to someone again. In that moment, I saw Diane clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the judgmental mother-in-law or the manipulative grandmother, but as a lonely woman whose grief had twisted into obsession. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me understand it. Emily loves you, I said finally. That's never been in question. But what you did has consequences, Diane. Trust isn't easily rebuilt. We collected Emily from the court's childcare center, her face lighting up when she saw us. As we walked toward the exit, she spotted Diane sitting alone in the hallway. "Grandma," she called, pulling away from Mark's hand and running to her. "Are you coming to our house?" This simple question hung in the air, Emily's innocent face looking expectantly between us adults. Diane looked uncertainly at Mark and me. "Not today, sweetheart," I said gently. "Grandma needs to go home and rest." "But when will I see her again?" Emily persisted. Mark knelt beside our daughter. "We'll figure that out soon, Em. Right now, let's go home and make that spaghetti Mommy promised. Okay?" The following weeks were a careful navigation through emotional minefields. Emily asked about her grandmother daily at first. We explained in age-appropriate terms that Grandma had made a mistake by taking her without asking, and needed some time apart to think about her actions. Mark was devastated by his mother's betrayal, but insisted on maintaining some connection for Emily's sake. We arranged for Diane to attend family therapy with us, a condition she reluctantly accepted. The first sessions were tense, with Diane alternating between defensive justifications and tearful apologies. "I still don't understand why you didn't just talk to us," Mark said during our third session. "If you wanted more time with Emily, we could have worked something out." "I was afraid you'd say no," Diane admitted. "And I couldn't bear the rejection." "Not from you." Slowly, painfully, we established new boundaries. Diane could visit Emily at our home on Sunday afternoons, with one of us always present. Phone calls were scheduled twice weekly. As trust gradually rebuilt, we allowed Emily to spend occasional days, never overnight, at Diane's house, with clear drop-off and pickup times. For my part, I struggled with forgiveness. Each time I looked at my daughter, I remembered the panic of finding her gone, the violation of having my parenting questioned in court, the betrayal of the false allegations. But I also saw how Emily's face lit up when her grandmother arrived, how she treasured the special attention Diane gave her. 6 months after the court hearing, Diane invited us to dinner at her house, the first time we'd been there as a family since everything happened. As Emily showed Mark her latest art project, Diane pulled me into the kitchen. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver frame containing a photo of Emily and me at the beach last summer, our heads bent together over a tide pool, laughing. "I took this before everything," Diane said. "I was going to use it in court to show that I could take better pictures of Emily than you could." She shook her head. "That sounds so petty now, but when I looked at it later, all I could see was how much she adores you, how good you are with her." I traced the edge of the frame, not trusting myself to speak. "I'm sorry, Jennifer," Diane continued, her voice breaking. "Not just for taking her, but for all of it. For the judgment, the criticism, the competition. You're an excellent mother. Emily is lucky to have you." The words I'd longed to hear for years washed over me. They didn't erase the pain or rebuild the trust completely, but they opened a door I thought had been permanently closed. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." Later that evening, as we drove home with Emily sleeping in the back seat, Mark reached for my hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I thought about the long road we'd traveled, the terror of Emily's disappearance, the shock of the court summons, the painful revelations, and now the fragile new understanding we were building. "I'm getting there," I answered honestly. "We all are. Family isn't just about blood or legal ties," I realized. It's about the boundaries we create to protect each other, the forgiveness we offer when those boundaries are crossed, and the courage to rebuild when everything falls apart. Sometimes the people who should love us most become the ones we need protection from. And sometimes, with enough work and honesty, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal.